Marcus Johnson woke up at 5:30 a.m., just like he did every morning. His apartment in the south side of Chicago was simple but neat, with few personal touches. The bookshelf held history books and political biographies, perfect for his cover as a community college history professor. No one in his neighborhood knew that Marcus Johnson wasn't just a teacher. For 8 years, he had worked as a CIA field operative specializing in domestic counterintelligence. His assignment in Chicago involved tracking foreign agents trying to recruit Americans in sensitive government positions. Another day, another identity, Marcus mumbled to himself as he made coffee. He checked his secure phone, a message from his handler about a meeting later that night. Something about new intelligence on a Russian operation targeting the city's water systems. At 7:30 a.m., Marcus left his apartment wearing a simple button-down shirt, khaki pants, and glasses that made him look more scholarly. His neighbors saw a friendly, quiet man who taught history and volunteered at the community center on weekends. Mrs. Parker from across the hall waved as she collected her newspaper. "Morning, Professor. Beautiful day, isn't it?" she called out. "It sure is, Mrs. Parker. Have a good one," Marcus replied with a warm smile that disappeared as soon as he turned away. Work mode engaged. At the community college, Marcus taught 2 morning classes on American history. His students found him engaging and knowledgeable. His colleagues respected him but knew little about his personal life, exactly how Marcus wanted it. During lunch, Marcus slipped away to a coffee shop 3 blocks from campus. He ordered a black coffee and sat in the corner, back to the wall, facing the entrance, a habit from his training. He opened his laptop and accessed a secure server through layers of encryption. New information had come in about his target. He memorized the details and closed the connection. By 4:30 p.m., Marcus was back home. He spent an hour working out in his living room, push-ups, pull-ups on a doorframe bar, and shadowboxing. Physical fitness wasn't optional in his line of work. After a shower, he ate a simple dinner while watching the local news, scanning for anything relevant to his operations. At 8:00 p.m., Marcus changed into dark jeans and a black jacket. He placed a small pistol in an ankle holster, authorized for his protection, but a last resort. In his pocket went a special phone, encrypted keys, and a flash drive disguised as a house key. He drove his ordinary Toyota sedan to an industrial area near the lake. The meeting spot was a storage facility that the agency used occasionally. Marcus parked 2 blocks away and walked, checking regularly for anyone following him. Inside Unit 247, his handler waited, a woman in her 50s who went by Diana for these meetings. "You're clear on tonight's objective?" Diana asked without greeting. "Make contact with the source, verify their information about the water treatment facility, and secure the technical documents," Marcus replied. "Good. And remember, if anything feels off, I abort and contact you through Channel 3. I know the drill." Diana handed him a small envelope. "New access codes. Memorize and destroy." As they finished, Diana added, "Intelligence suggests increasing counterintelligence activity in your area. Stay extra alert." Marcus nodded. 8 years in the field had taught him that heightened caution was normal, but something in Diana's tone suggested more specific concerns. As he left the storage unit, Marcus felt the familiar mix of focus and adrenaline that came with his work. What he didn't know was that tonight's operation would set in motion events that would expose not just foreign threats, but corruption much closer to home, corruption that would soon target him directly. Marcus Johnson's meeting with his informant had gone perfectly. Just after midnight, he drove his Toyota through Chicago's empty streets, the flash drive with critical intelligence about foreign agents attempting to compromise the city's water systems secure in his pocket. The city lights reflected off his windshield as light rain began to fall. His mind was already organizing the information he'd gathered when police lights flashed in his rearview mirror. Marcus checked his speedometer. He wasn't speeding. He signaled and pulled over, keeping his hands visible on the steering wheel as the police cruiser stopped behind him. "Stay calm. Follow procedure," he whispered to himself, mentally reviewing his cover story. He was just a college professor heading home from a late faculty meeting. 2 officers approached, one on each side of his car. The taller one, whose nameplate read Brennan, shined a flashlight directly into Marcus's eyes. "License and registration," Officer Brennan demanded without explaining why he'd been pulled over. "May I ask why I've been stopped, officer?" Marcus asked politely, reaching slowly for his wallet. "Taillights out," Brennan replied sharply. "And you were swerving." Marcus knew both claims were false. His car had just passed inspection last week, and he'd been driving perfectly straight. As Marcus handed over his documents, the second officer, Walsh, circled the car, shining his flashlight through the windows. "Step out of the vehicle, sir," Brennan ordered after barely glancing at Marcus's license. Years of training kept Marcus's face neutral despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. This wasn't a routine traffic stop. He complied, stepping out slowly. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked. "We receive reports of drug activity in this area," Walsh said, moving closer. "Mind if we search your vehicle?" "I do mind, actually," Marcus replied calmly. "I don't consent to a search without a warrant." Something flashed in Brennan's eyes, anger or perhaps surprise that Marcus knew his rights. "Got something to hide?" Brennan stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space. "Because you seem nervous." "I'm not nervous, just tired. It's late, and I'd like to get home." Marcus maintained eye contact, noting every detail about the officers for later. Brennan nodded to Walsh, who spoke into his radio. "Dispatch, we've got a suspicious individual, possibly intoxicated, refusing search. Requesting K9 unit." Marcus knew there was no K9 unit coming. This was a tactic to pressure him. "Sir, I'm going to need you to turn around and place your hands on the vehicle," Brennan said, his hand moving to his handcuffs. As Marcus complied, he noticed Walsh circling back to the patrol car. Through the side mirror, he caught a glimpse of Walsh removing something from the trunk. When Walsh returned, he stood watching as Brennan patted Marcus down. "What's this?" Brennan suddenly announced, pulling a small plastic bag from Marcus's jacket pocket, a pocket that had been empty moments before. "That's not mine," Marcus stated firmly, his mind racing. He was being framed. "White powder substance, looks like cocaine," Brennan announced loudly, as if for a body camera. "You're under arrest." As Brennan cuffed him, Marcus noticed Walsh slip something else into his car through the passenger window. They were planting more evidence. Marcus could have identified himself as CIA, but that would compromise months of work and potentially national security. He made a split-second decision to maintain his cover. "I want a lawyer," he said as they pushed him into the back of the patrol car. Through the window, Marcus watched Walsh discover more drugs in his vehicle, holding them up triumphantly to Brennan. "Got him," Walsh said, grinning. "Another dealer off the streets." As the patrol car pulled away, Marcus counted street names and memorized the officers' badge numbers. These cops had no idea who they'd just arrested, or the storm that was about to break over their heads. Lieutenant Mike Rivers leaned back in his office chair, the blinds half closed against the morning sun. The precinct hummed with activity outside his door, but inside, officers Brennan and Walsh stood at attention, looking pleased with themselves. "So you got another one last night?" Rivers asked, flipping through the arrest report on his desk. "Yes, sir," Brennan nodded enthusiastically. "Black male, mid-30s, driving through the east side after midnight. Found nearly 2 ounces of cocaine in his possession." Walsh added, "Clean record, works as some kind of professor. The perfect mule, nobody would suspect him." Rivers nodded slowly. "And the evidence is secure?" "Absolutely," Brennan replied, lowering his voice. "Chain of custody is perfect. Our body cams had a technical malfunction during the search." Rivers smiled thinly. This wasn't the first time his officers had brought in such a convenient arrest. The 7th Precinct had developed a reputation for high drug arrest numbers, something the commissioner publicly praised. What remained hidden was how many of those arrests were manufactured. "Good work," Rivers said. "This should keep our numbers up for the month. Rodriguez will handle processing." After the officers left, Rivers opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small notebook. He wrote down Johnson Marcus and $2,000 next to it. Later, a local dealer named Tyrone would pay that amount to keep officers away from his corner for another week. The money would be split between Rivers, Brennan, Walsh, and 2 other officers. Meanwhile, Across town, a man in an expensive suit entered a high-rise office building. Special Agent Thomas Clark of the DEA checked his watch as he waited for the elevator. His confidential informant had warned him about corruption in Chicago's 7th Precinct, but gathering proof had been difficult. At the same time, in the precinct's evidence room, Officer Rodriguez carefully logged in the drugs supposedly found in Marcus Johnson's car. He didn't question where they really came from. Everyone knew certain officers carried drop bags to plant on suspects when needed. "Is this the professor from last night?" asked Detective Wilson, glancing at the evidence bags. Rodriguez nodded. "Yeah, they got him good. Brennan says he was acting nervous." "They always are," Wilson chuckled, though something in his eyes showed discomfort. He was one of the few in the precinct who hadn't joined Rivers' scheme. He'd seen too many questionable arrests lately, mostly black men, mostly at night, mostly with similar charges. Back in Rivers' office, the lieutenant made a phone call. "Judge Hanson? Mike Rivers here. We got another case coming your way. Yeah, Professor Type, clean record, caught with cocaine. No, he's claiming it wasn't his. Of course, we appreciate your support as always." Rivers hung up, satisfied. Judge Hanson could be counted on to deny bail for drug cases and push for maximum sentences. In the holding cells, other officers processed recent arrests. 2 young officers watched as veteran cops handled suspects roughly, particularly the black men brought in overnight. "That's how it's done here," whispered Officer Riley to his rookie partner. "Rivers runs a tight ship. Our arrest numbers are the highest in the city. But some of these guys," the rookie began uncertainly. "Don't ask questions if you want to make detective," Riley cut him off. "This is how we clean up the streets." What none of them realized was that their perfect system had just made its fatal mistake. Marcus Johnson wasn't just another innocent black man they could frame. The CIA operative was already analyzing everything, every name, every face, every procedure violation. And while Rivers joked with Judge Hanson, a message was already being received at CIA headquarters. Operative EAGL Dark, missing STEGULED Chetfakayan, last known location CHSCAGO 7th Precinct. The clock had started ticking on the 7th Precinct's corrupt operation. Soon, their carefully constructed world would collapse around them. The holding cell at Chicago's 7th Precinct smelled of bleach and sweat. Marcus Johnson sat on the metal bench, his back against the wall, seemingly just another frustrated man caught in the system, but his mind was working like a computer, recording everything. "Johnson, your phone call," a board officer announced, unlocking the cell. Marcus followed him to a wall-mounted phone. He could have called his CIA handler, but that would risk exposing his cover. Instead, he dialed the number few would expect. "Angela Ramirez, attorney at law," answered a sharp female voice. "Ms. Ramirez, my name is Marcus Johnson. I've been arrested on false drug charges at the 7th Precinct. I need representation immediately." "I'll be there in 30 minutes, she replied without hesitation. Angela Ramirez wasn't on the CIA payroll, but she had a reputation for taking on police misconduct cases. Marcus had memorized her number months ago as part of his emergency protocols. Back in his cell, Marcus closed his eyes, appearing to nap while actually listening to every conversation around him. 2 officers passed by, talking in low voices. "Rivers wants this one processed fast," said the taller one. "Walsh says he's some college professor." "Perfect setup," laughed the other. "Who's gonna believe him over our boys in blue?" Marcus memorized their faces and names from their badges. Every piece of information was ammunition. Meanwhile, across town, Diana paced her office. Marcus had missed his scheduled check-in. She called a secure number. "We have a situation," she told her superior. "Eagle Dark missed contact. Last location ping was near Chicago's 7th Precinct." "Initiate Protocol 16, came the reply. "Discreet surveillance only. No direct contact unless absolutely necessary." Within an hour, unmarked vehicles with CIA operatives began circling the precinct. A technician in a van accessed the precinct's security cameras through a back door in their system. Inside the precinct, Angela Ramirez arrived, briefcase in hand. The desk sergeant looked up with annoyance. "I'm here to see Marcus Johnson," she announced firmly. "Lawyer already? These dealers work fast. he muttered, signaling for an officer to escort her. In a small interview room, Marcus and Angela met. He noticed the camera in the corner and kept his expression neutral. "They're claiming they found cocaine in my car and pocket," he told her quietly. "It was planted. Officers Brennan and Walsh conducted an illegal search after stopping me for a supposedly broken taillight." Angela took notes. "Did they read you your rights?" Eventually, after they found the drugs, Marcus replied, "They were sloppy. Officer Walsh planted something in my car while Brennan distracted me." "Body cam footage?" "They claimed technical difficulties," Marcus said with a knowing look. Angela had seen this pattern before. "Sounds familiar." While they talked, Lieutenant Rivers watched through the one-way glass, frowning. Most suspects looked scared, defensive. Johnson seemed too calm, methodical. "What do we know about him?" Rivers asked Officer Rodriguez. "History professor at Chicago Community College, clean record. Lives in an apartment on the south side, nothing special." Rivers wasn't convinced. "Run a deeper check. Something feels off." Back in the interview room, Marcus subtly guided Angela's questions. "Can you check if they've had similar arrests?" "Same officers, same charges, same traffic stop excuse." Angela raised an eyebrow, impressed by his thinking. "Already on it. This precinct has a pattern." What Marcus couldn't tell her was that CIA analysts were already compiling those statistics, along with financial records of everyone involved. The trap was being set. As Angela left, promising to file motions immediately, she passed Officer Walsh in the hallway. "Wasting your time, counselor," Walsh smirked. "Your client's going away for a long time." Angela smiled coolly. "We'll see about that." In his cell, Marcus returned to his waiting game. Patience was a CIA operative's greatest weapon. While Rivers and his corrupt officers thought they were processing just another victim, Marcus was building a case that would destroy them all. Angela Ramirez's office was small but efficient, with case files stacked neatly and legal books lining the walls. For the past 3 days since taking Marcus Johnson's case, she had barely slept. Something about this case felt different from the dozens of other police misconduct cases she had handled. "Tell me again exactly what happened," Angela said, sitting across from Marcus in the visitor's room at the county jail. The table between them was scratched with years of frustrated carvings. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "They pulled me over claiming a broken taillight. When I questioned them, they became aggressive. Officer Walsh disappeared to their patrol car while Brennan kept me talking. Next thing I know, they're finding drugs in my pocket and car." Angela nodded, writing notes. "The preliminary hearing is in 2 days. The prosecutor is offering a deal. Plead guilty, serve 3 years instead of 10. "I won't plead guilty to something I didn't do," Marcus said firmly. What Angela didn't know was that Marcus was giving her just enough to build a defense without revealing his CIA connection. Each meeting with her was a careful dance of truth and necessary omission. Meanwhile, in a nondescript office building downtown, Diana and 2 other CIA operatives reviewed everything they had gathered on the 7th Precinct. "Brennan and Walsh have arrested 17 black men in the last 6 months using the same method," reported an analyst named Harris. "Traffic stop, mysterious discovery of drugs." Diana studied the financial records on her screen. "Lieutenant Rivers deposits $2,000 cash every month that doesn't match his salary. Similar patterns for Brennan and Walsh. We've also identified a Judge Hansen who consistently denies bail in these cases," added the third operative. "His brother-in-law owns the private prison where most of these men end up." Diana looked at Marcus's file photo. "Has he signaled for extraction?" "No," Harris replied. "He's maintaining cover. Smart move. If we pulled him out using official channels, the corruption remains hidden." Back at her office, Angela was building her case the hard way. She had filed motions to see the body cam footage, only to be told there were technical malfunctions. She requested maintenance records for the police cruiser's dashboard camera, conveniently missing. The pattern was familiar. Her assistant knocked on the door. "Someone left this for you." He handed her a manila envelope. Inside, Angela found printouts of arrest records, 17 cases, all with striking similarities to Marcus's. No sender information, just a note. "Look for the pattern." Angela spread the documents across her desk, noting the officers involved, charges filed, and case outcomes. All 17 men had been arrested by Brennan and Walsh. All claimed evidence was planted. All were denied bail by Judge Hanson. "This is bigger than one bad arrest," she whispered to herself. That evening, Angela visited Marcus again. "Someone sent me records of similar cases," she told him. "Too many coincidences to ignore. But without video evidence, it's still their word against yours." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Check if any businesses along the street where they stopped me have security cameras. They might have captured the real story." Angela looked at him with newfound respect. Most clients didn't think so strategically. "Already working on it," she said. "I've also filed a motion to examine their patrol car. If they planted drugs from their own supply, there might be trace evidence." What Angela didn't know was that CIA operatives had already secured footage from an ATM camera across the street from Marcus's traffic stop. The video clearly showed Officer Walsh removing something from his pocket before finding it in Marcus's car. As Marcus returned to his cell, he passed a message to a janitor, actually a CIA asset, with a single word: "Wait." The CIA would hold their evidence until the perfect moment. When it came, the corrupt officers wouldn't know what hit them. The courtroom was packed on Monday morning. Journalists filled the back row, drawn by Angela Ramirez's reputation for taking on police misconduct cases. Marcus Johnson sat at the defense table in a borrowed suit, his expression calm despite the circumstances. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Harold Hanson," Bailiff announced. Judge Hanson entered, a thin man with cold eyes and a reputation for harsh sentences. Marcus noted how the judge barely glanced at the defense table before taking his seat. "Case number 2025 CR 7734, People v. Marcus Johnson," the clerk read. District Attorney William Peterson stood, straightening his expensive tie. "Your Honor, the state charges the defendant with possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute, a Class X felony." Judge Hanson looked over his glasses at Marcus. "How does the defendant plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," Marcus replied firmly. "Very well, Mr. Peterson, your opening statement." Peterson approached the jury box confidently. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is simple. On March 3rd, dedicated police officers stopped a vehicle for a traffic violation. During their lawful investigation, they discovered a significant amount of cocaine. The defendant, who teaches at a community college, was using his respectable position as cover for drug dealing. The evidence will prove his guilt beyond reasonable doubt." When Angela's turn came, she stood slowly, making eye contact with each juror. "This case isn't about drugs," she began. "It's about abuse of power. Marcus Johnson is an innocent man who was targeted, pulled over without cause, and framed by officers with a documented history of suspicious arrests. The evidence will show that Officers Brennan and Walsh didn't find drugs. They planted them." Judge Hanson frowned. "That's a serious accusation, Counselor." "One we're prepared to prove, Your Honor," Angela replied confidently. The prosecution called Officer Brennan first. He described the traffic stop in practice detail: the broken taillight, Marcus's suspicious behavior, the discovery of drugs. "And you followed proper procedure throughout?" Peterson asked. "Absolutely," Brennan replied. "By the book." When Angela's cross-examination began, the atmosphere tensed. "Officer Brennan, your report states you discovered cocaine in Mr. Johnson's jacket pocket during a pat-down. Is that correct?" "Yes, it was right there in his left outer pocket." Angela approached with a document. "I have the maintenance record for Mr. Johnson's vehicle, showing it passed inspection 2 days before this incident with all lights functioning properly." "Equipment can fail any time," Brennan replied smoothly. "Officer, did your body camera malfunction during this arrest?" Brennan shifted slightly. "Unfortunately, yes, a technical issue." "Interesting. And was this the first time your camera malfunctioned during an arrest?" "Objection," Peterson called. "Relevance." "I'm establishing a pattern, Your Honor," Angela explained. "I'll allow it, but tread carefully," Judge Hanson warned. Angela presented records showing Brennan's bodycam had malfunctioned during 17 previous arrests, all involving blackmail suspects, all resulting in drug charges. When Officer Walsh took the stand, his testimony matched Brennan's almost word for word. Too perfectly, Angela noted. Officer Walsh, where exactly were you when Officer Brennan discovered the drugs in Mr. Johnson's pocket? Angela asked. Standing right beside him, Walsh answered. Angela produced a diagram. So not returning to your patrol car during the stop. Walsh hesitated. I may have gone back briefly for equipment. What equipment specifically? I don't recall exactly. The first day ended with the prosecution confident despite Angela's questioning. Lieutenant Rivers, watching from the gallery, gave a satisfied nod to his officers as court adjourned. What none of them noticed was a woman in the back row, Diana, quietly typing a message on her phone. Proceed with Phase 2. Court resumes 9 a.m. tomorrow. Marcus, being led back to holding, caught her eye for just a moment. The trap was almost ready to spring. The second day of trial began just like the first. Judge Hanson entered with the same stern expression. The same officers sat confidently behind the prosecution table, and Marcus Johnson maintained his calm demeanor beside Angela Ramirez. The prosecution calls Detective Michael Rodriguez to the stand, District Attorney Peterson announced. Rodriguez, who had processed the evidence in Marcus's case, approached the witness stand. After being sworn in, he confidently described the cocaine found in Marcus's possession, confirming the chain of custody was intact. No further questions, Peterson said, looking pleased. Angela stood for cross-examination. Detective Rodriguez, how many cases involving officers Brennan and Walsh have you processed in the past year? I don't keep count, Rodriguez answered vaguely. Would 23 sound accurate? All drug-related, all involving suspects of color. Before Rodriguez could answer, the courtroom doors opened. A tall man in a crisp dark suit entered, followed by two others. The man walked directly to the judge's bench and presented identification. Your Honor, I am Special Agent James Carter, Central Intelligence Agency. I need to approach the bench immediately on a matter of national security. A shocked murmur swept through the courtroom. Judge Hanson's face paled as he waved the attorneys forward. The CIA agent spoke in hushed tones while handing the judge an official-looking folder with government seals. Marcus sat perfectly still, his eyes forward, giving no indication this development was connected to him. After several minutes of intense discussion, Judge Hanson cleared his throat. This court will take a 30-minute recess, all parties to remain in the building. As the judge hurried to his chambers with the CIA officials, confusion erupted in the courtroom. Lieutenant Rivers leaned forward to whisper urgently to Officers Brennan and Walsh, whose confident expressions had vanished. In the judge's chambers, Agent Carter laid out photographs and documents on the desk. The defendant, Marcus Johnson, is a CIA operative working on a critical national security investigation, Carter explained. These officers not only interfered with his mission but framed an innocent man. He played a video on his laptop, crystal clear footage from a surveillance camera across from where Marcus was stopped. It showed Officer Walsh removing something from his pocket, then planting it in Marcus's car while Brennan kept him distracted. We have similar evidence for 16 other cases involving these officers, Carter continued. Bank records showing unexplained cash deposits, audio recordings of Lieutenant Rivers discussing their scheme. When court resumed, the atmosphere was electric. Judge Hanson's hands trembled slightly as he addressed the courtroom. In light of evidence presented to this court by federal authorities, I am dismissing all charges against Marcus Johnson effective immediately. He turned to the officers. Officers Brennan, Walsh, Lieutenant Rivers, and Detective Rodriguez are ordered to surrender themselves to federal custody pending investigation into civil rights violations, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. Cows erupted. Rivers jumped to his feet. This is outrageous. You can't. Actually, he can, said a woman's voice. Diana stood in the center aisle, holding up her CIA credentials. And that's just the beginning. Federal agents entered the courtroom, moving toward the stunned officers. Walsh tried to run for the door, but was quickly intercepted. As handcuffs were placed on the corrupt officers, Marcus finally allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He caught Diana's eye, giving her a slight nod. District Attorney Peterson sat frozen, realizing he had been unwittingly prosecuting a CIA agent based on fabricated evidence. Angela Ramirez looked at Marcus with new understanding. "You could have told me," she whispered. "I couldn't," Marcus replied simply, "but I knew you'd find the truth anyway." As Marcus walked free from the courtroom, reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and the four officers who had thought themselves untouchable were led away in handcuffs. Justice had arrived in dramatic fashion, and the 7th Precinct's reign of corruption was finally over. 3 months after the dramatic courtroom revelation, Marcus Johnson sat in a quiet coffee shop downtown. The Chicago Tribune lay open on the table, its headline bold and clear: "7 officers indicted in police corruption scandal." The story detailed how a Department of Justice investigation had uncovered years of systematic framing of innocent citizens, primarily black men, by officers in Chicago's 7th Precinct. Marcus sipped his coffee as he read. He looked different now, his professor disguise replaced by a more polished appearance. His CIA assignment in Chicago had officially ended, but he had requested to stay and see the aftermath through to completion. The bell above the door jingled, and Angela Ramirez entered. She spotted Marcus and walked over, sliding into the chair across from him. "Professor Johnson," she said with a small smile, still using his cover name despite knowing the truth. "Counselor," he nodded. "Congratulations on your appointment." After the case, Mayor Williams had appointed Angela to lead a new police accountability task force. Her first action had been to review every conviction involving the corrupt officers. 17 convictions overturned so far, Angela said, ordering her own coffee. Men who lost years of their lives because of Brennan, Walsh, and Rivers. Some lost their families, their homes, everything. Marcus nodded solemnly, and Judge Hanson resigned in disgrace when they found his offshore accounts. His brother-in-law's private prison contract is being investigated too. They sat in silence for a moment, watching people pass by outside. You never really explained how a CIA agent ended up being arrested by corrupt local cops," Angela said. "Classified, I assume." Marcus smiled slightly. "Let's just say I was tracking threats more significant than dirty officers. But sometimes the universe puts you exactly where you need to be." Later that afternoon, Marcus walked into a community center in the neighborhood where most of the framed men had lived. A meeting was underway, families affected by police corruption sharing their stories. Marcus slipped into a seat at the back, listening. A man named James Taylor was speaking, one of the first men framed by Brennan and Walsh, who had served 4 years before the truth came out. "When they planted those drugs on me, I lost everything," James was saying. "My job, my apartment, my relationship with my kids. Who believes a black man claiming the cops set him up?" Heads nodded around the room. The pain was raw, the injustice deep. "But today, I'm free," James continued. "And those officers are facing the system they abused. That matters." After the meeting, Marcus approached James. They talked briefly about the case, about justice, about moving forward. "I heard it was some CIA guy who finally caught them," James said. "Whoever he is, I owe him my freedom." Marcus just nodded. Sometimes justice needs a push. That evening, Diana met Marcus at the lakefront. The sunset painted the water orange and gold. "Your new assignment is ready," she said, handing him a small flash drive. "Berlin, counterintelligence again." Marcus took it, looking out over the water. "The director approved my recommendation?" Diana nodded. "Full review of all CIA protocols regarding interaction with local law enforcement, and a new training module on recognizing and documenting police misconduct." "It's not enough," Marcus said quietly, "but it's a start." "You did good work here, Marcus," Diana told him, "beyond the mission parameters." As night fell over Chicago, Marcus knew the city had changed, perhaps only slightly, but meaningfully. The corrupt officers would face justice. Innocent men were free. New safeguards were being created. Sometimes being in the wrong place at the right time made all the difference. His CIA training had taught him to remain detached, to focus only on national security threats. But Marcus Johnson had learned that true security began with justice, even for those the system was designed to ignore. Tomorrow, he would head to Berlin on a new mission. But part of him would always remain in Chicago, in that moment when truth exploded in a courtroom and the powerful discovered they weren't above the law after all.